Welcome to GMspiration.
This episode of GMspiration is brought to you by Under the Bed Habitat Specialists. Boogie creatures have long been considered pests, and parents over the centuries have forced them out from under the bed and into more auspicious locations. This has led to far more dangerous creatures taking residence in your residence. Here at Under the Bed Habitat Specialists, or UBHS for short, we ensure your home is set up for a friendly boogie creature and ensure the ecological balance and stop the creatures from the nightmare realm from moving in. We conduct a standard O'Rourke sweeps, ensuring that your mirrored surfaces have an imperfection rating of 0.2 on the Dust-Melchin index, and that the space under your fridge is exactly as deep as the fridge space would allow. With our patented Rubenstein ecology habitats, we ensure that you get a friendly visitor for your family from beyond. Use code ZELDA for 20% off. Call now and receive a free Dreamcatcher. I love SCPs. One of my most watched YouTube channels is called the Exploring series. I'll put the link in the doobly-doo below. I've mentioned their channel before. I originally went there for videos on Cthulhu, but stayed for their SCPs. I've also successfully used a few SCP-inspired items and locations in my games, so I thought it was a good opportunity to run through how I use them and explain the process I took. Before we get into that, let's explain what SCPs actually are. SCP stands for Secure, Contain, Protect. The SCP Foundation is a fictional, crowdsourced collection of stories and containment procedures. There is no fixed canon for the SCP universe, but the SCP Foundation is a through line through most of their stories. It is a global, very powerful, and secretive organization that attempts to contain and hide anomalies. These could be anything from a rock that causes you to procrastinate to a doorway into another reality, cosmic horrors to a cat missing the back half of its body but still moves around as if it was there. The unique nature of SCP is that most stories are presented as containment procedures, where instead of describing the monster or telling a tale, it goes through with scientific precision how the SCP is contained. Then of course there are the testing procedures. The SCP Foundation attempts to understand the things that they are containing, generally to better contain them, sometimes seemingly out of boredom, possibly just to make a good story. Some of the more intense stories involve exploration logs of anomalous locations, often by the expendable D-class. These are most often Foundation members who have been recruited from death row. In some bleaker stories, they have other more anomalous way of getting them. Most SCP tales take place in the modern day, but some of them are set in the far future, past, or even different realities. There is magic, often described as thaumaturgy, as well as monsters, godlike entities, super AI, ancient relics, and meta-narrative lifeforms. I'm a firm believer that people learn from other people. Consuming a zombie movie and talking about how you would make it and what you would do is how we have iterated to the current zombies we all know and love. And so, when we consume SCPs, I think it's natural for us to think about how we would integrate them into our stories and how it would make them work for us. There is a role-playing game that is inspired by SCP-like fiction called Delta Green. I've bought a copy, but I'm actually yet to run a game. It's similar to Call of Cthulhu, but instead of being an independent investigator, you're part of an organization trying to cover up these horrors from society. I'll put a link in the doobly-doo to it. There is a free intro book called Need to Know if you're interested. So perhaps you're adding these to your Delta Green game, perhaps Call of Cthulhu, or maybe D&D. Whatever you do, let's have some fun. I'm going to start with some of the SCPs that I use in my games. This will act also as a bit of an introduction to what SCPs are if you're not across them. The first is SCP-127, the Living Gun. 127 appears like a normal machine gun. However, inside it is an organic creature. It has bones, teeth, tongue, and muscles. Instead of firing bullets, it fires human-like teeth. It cannot be reloaded, instead regenerating teeth over time. It can typically shoot 60 times before needing 3 to 5 days to regrow a new supply of ammunition. It was found in an extensive collection of guns after the owner died of what appears to be natural causes. It was found while cataloguing the collection, transferred to SCP Foundation, where they have tested it and ruled that while anomalous, it is classified as safe. The SCP Foundation applies classifications to determine how dangerous it is and what sort of containment procedures it needs. This has changed a couple of years ago. It used to be simply safe, Euclid, or Keta, with the last referring to things that could possibly destroy the world. It's a bit more complicated than that now, but I'm not going to go into it as that could take a whole video by itself. But that's pretty much it. It is a weird gun. The article is short and doesn't explain where it came from or how it works. This is common with a lot of SCP articles, as we are left to think about and fill in the blanks ourselves. Did it kill its owner? How does it eat? Was it once a human? Is it just a gun, or is it something pretending to be a gun? When I brought this into my D&D game, I decided it was being sold by another SCP, which I'll get to next. I rebadged the gun as a mimic, able to generate and shoot teeth as it changed form. Each shot expended a charge, with additional charges being able to trigger additional effects or more damage. Based on the player's request, he could feed the gun, who he named Anomaly, so that it could learn additional effects. One was the poison spray cantrip, after it consumed a large amount of high-quality poison. So back to how the player was offered the weapon. This was a Spelljammer campaign, and on its ship, in the middle of the void, a man appeared, with a wide smile and cheap suit. This was SCP-1879, the Indoor Salesman. 1879 appears in interior doors, knocking when a person goes within 2 meters. The knocking continues until the door is answered. At this point, the salesman enters and attempts to sell an item to the target. These items don't have to have any connection, and they include a red rose, 220 bananas, a thermonuclear bomb, and a puppy. The cost of these are similarly vague. The salesman's exact wording for the rose was, "All I'm asking for is your heart." Upon being accepted, the civilian's entire cardiovascular system disappeared, and the civilian, unsurprisingly, died. The bananas cost all the sugar in the house. With the phrase, "Gimme some sugar, sweetie," the thermonuclear bomb was, "I want your soul." Luckily for this target, they only lost 2 Aretha Franklin albums. It's revealed later that the salesman thought taking these albums instead of the person's soul would give their boss a kick, but it did not. The puppy, the salesman stated, "It doesn't cost any money. I promise, just 12 years every time." After accepting it, the civilian disappeared for 12 years. The SCP Foundation has not been able to contain the salesman, and given its ability to manifest and demanifest, summon devices like thermonuclear bomb, and demanifest parts of people, it's been given the highest danger rating, Keta. So creepy salesman, offering odd items, appears anywhere, and is vague, and monkey paws the recipient. If you haven't heard of what a monkey paw is, it's an old horror story where a monkey paw grants wishes for enormous or unintended prices. For example, wishing to win the lottery, but then having your spells kill you for the inheritance. In my case, the salesman manifested to a randomly determined player, knocking on a nearby door. Once opened, the salesman started to haggle for the gun, eventually agreeing that the cost of the gun was 1 day's work, to happen when the character no longer served on the ship's crew. The twist? 1 day's service involved the character being taken into a temporal space where they were to be held. He would then complete tasks, being deployed somewhere in time as a mercenary, fight for a few minutes, and then return. Sort of like Gordon Freeman from the Half-Life games. If a single D&D fight only lasts a minute, well then, he's certainly going to be fighting for a long, long time. This for the most part did not affect the player, until they died in a fight. Not unconscious, mind you, dead. Before they could resurrect him, the salesman turns up, collects the body, doffed his hat and left. After all, dead people can't serve on a crew. I did have a fun moment earlier in the campaign where the crew fought the version of the character serving his time. He was summoned by an enemy and fought until the enemy was killed, at which point he stopped, had a conversation with himself, and then demanifested back to wait for his next summon. An item and a person, or at least a person-like thing. In the same game, I also used a location, SCP-5005 Lamplight. Set in a very different timeline than many other SCPs, Lamplight is a location isolated in nothing, a void, a true void. A city, it has a large sun-like lamp overhead that dimly illuminates the city. Much of the entry for Lamplight talks about the areas of the city, the inhabitants, and the odd nature of the reality in which this weird pocket-like dimension exists. The light appears to maintain the city, but how does it do this? What is the light? Why do some people seem to age differently here? And what is the silty built upon? All these questions exist in the article, and I use them in my version. Lamplight for me was a vibrant city where most people did not question their existence. The people that lived there came from all manner of different locations, dimensions, and times. Many were refugees, some had always lived there, and others ended up there when spells like teleport backfired. The players, well, they did some things that should not happen, nearly caused the city to be destroyed. They found out the answer to those questions, but at a pretty sizable cost. In these examples, I took an SCP concept, kept a lot of the original, and modified them only enough to fit into my setting. The players spent many sessions interacting with these SCPs, particularly Lamplight, where they spent several sessions exploring and attempting to solve the mystery. If you're familiar with deep D&D lore and about where aberrations come from, you might see how you can link Lamplight to the border of the Far Realm and the gnashing teeth and grasping tentacles that lie beyond. The next SCP, I like to include as many games as possible. SCP 3790, the Department of Abnormalities. This SCP is a location, an abandoned structure under a canning company warehouse in London. The structure has several levels, each of which contain containment cells. It is described as if it was an early version of the SCP Foundation, and indeed, the sign above the door to enter it reads, the SCP Foundation Department of Abnormalities. However, the SCP Foundation has no record of this location existing. A recurring theme across SCP articles is how volatile reality is. Things are remade, brought, or collapsed from other realities and overwritten. Even human history is rewritten, with the episodic nature of many of the stories requiring the SCP Foundation to have the narrative equivalent of a giant reset button. When history is malleable and smashed together as much as it is across the collective writings that make up the SCP universe, it makes sense that it would be artifacts of previous eras. Sometimes these are ancient ruins containing high-tech machines. Sometimes it's memories, echoes of things bleeding into what was, and sometimes it's a door leading to something that has been forgotten. The last one is what the Department of Abnormalities is. 6 of the levels are described to us, long hallways with small containment cells. Many are empty, others have signs on doors, and some still contain something. The 7th level is unreachable via the elevator, and so we are left to wonder what is down there. Many of these things contained in cells reference other SCPs. From a narrative sense, there could be drafts of other SCPs. Perhaps there was a reset of the world, and these are the versions of these SCPs that existed beforehand, somehow shielded from the rewrite. Maybe they're just old and forgotten. If time is repeated, then who knows how long these have been down here? Decades? Centuries? Millennia? I put a Department of Abnormalities into my world as echoes of the past. Perhaps they are just old. Perhaps they have come from somewhere else. In my Spelljammer game, a Department of Abnormalities facility has been taken over by mind flayers that were using it to conduct experiments. In a D&D Cyberpunk game, it was deep below the city, housing strange mutations and devices. What is fun about this facility is you can fill it with whatever you want. Ancient versions of monsters, weird machines, all sorts of chaotic goodies. In some of my cells, I just had bones. What was there? Did it die? Did it starve? Potentially, were the bones what were contained? It tells your players that they are in a living world, not just something that exists now, but something that existed into the past, and likely far into the future. Now I'd like to run through some other SCPs. Here is the icon for the video. So far we haven't covered any of the SCPs I've referenced in it. If you're an SCP fan and want to take a guess at any of them, pause the video and have a look. I will admit, some are a bit harder, while others I think are quite easy. I'm going to run through these in 3, 2, 1. Starting from the left, we have SCP-093, the Red Sea Object. This item moves towards mirrors when not being touched by a living being. When it is touching a mirror, it will connect to an alternative world, which has undergone some sort of religious apocalypse. The object itself is interesting, but what really grabs you about 093 is the exploration logs of this quite insane world, what happens to the people who are sent there, and how it mimics our own world. On our GMspiration's head, we have a skull-like nose, white eyes, stringy black hair. These are references to SCP-1471, MalO. This is a phone app that sends you photos of a skull-headed humanoid with white eyes and, well, stringy black hair. The photos are of places you know, with MalO standing in the scene. The photos get progressively closer to your current location. until the user starts to see MalO in the real world without their phone. MalO is an interesting example of how something anomalous can cause quite terrible effects without physically interacting with a person. It's quite a sad story, but an interesting one. Underneath our GMspiration's head, we have it wearing a pendant. This is SCP-963, Immortality. This is an indestructible pendant that takes the soul of anyone who dies wearing it. When the pendant touches someone else, they are then taken over by the previous owner, allowing that person imprinted on it to live forever. The current occupant is Dr. Elias Shaw. He's an employee of the Foundation, one of their many scientists, and due to his usefulness, he's allowed to continue to work for the Foundation rather than being contained. The benefit is that if he is accidentally killed in a containment breach or some other disaster, they can place it on one of the hapless D class, and he can come back and continue to work. This would be a great item to give an ancient wizard, able to move from body to body, changing form but keeping mind and personality. I can imagine a situation where you find an ancient holy order. The person who becomes ordained to lead the order has a pendant placed around their neck to show they're the leader. However, the pendant instantly takes over the person, bringing back the original founder, who has tricked the order into maintaining his immortality. Above this, we have a surgical cap with a few sprigs of lavender. This is a reference to SCP-049, the Plague Doctor. Plague Doctors were 17th century physicians that attempted to treat or stop the spread of the Black Plague, rather unsuccessfully. SCP-049 appears to be from that time, speaking and acting as the one would imagine. However, he has several anomalous abilities. First, his clothing, including his crooked Plague Doctor mask, appear to have grown out of him, being a part of his body. Second, he is old, potentially biologically immortal. Third, he can kill with a touch, having demonstrated this ability many times before. Fourth, he has a bag that can hold as of yet an undetermined amount of items. And finally, he's been trying to use the contents of the bag to turn bodies into zombies and attack anything but him. While he is generally cordial and even polite, he has an obsession with something he calls the pestilence. It is not clear what this is, but he claims to be able to detect it and will kill and experiment on any of those he thinks have it. This is all in his desire to eradicate the pestilence, but he will not, or perhaps cannot, explain what it is. There are theories from readers, including its compassion, as he reflects that the SCP Foundation does not have much of it, and the SCP Foundation is undoubtedly dispassionate. It could be the soul, or maybe aging. It could be some sort of disease that we can't determine. Given the fact that plague doctors tended to be loosely, if at all, trained, it could be absolutely nothing at all, purely something he thinks exists. Whatever it is, it causes the doctor to become aggressive, and one way that he can be calmed is through the scent of, you guessed it, lavender. Like some of the best SCPs, the doctor leaves with just as many questions as answers. He's friendly, but dangerous. He has moments of humanity mixed with monstrous outbursts. It's in this mix that makes him so loved by the community. You could use him as a template for more dangerous intelligent creatures, like hags. Is he evil? Is he insane? Perhaps he's a hero, doomed to continue his fight alone. Perhaps he's a manifestation of the superstition born from the fear of plagues. The Black Death killed 75 to 200 million people, or 30 to 6% of the continent's population. If anything could manifest a physical embodiment of the fear of pestilence, that would certainly be it. Next, we have the blue and yellow pocket, the same colours as the Swedish flag, and more importantly, IKEA. SCP-6008, the Infinite IKEA, is a multi-dimensional, seemingly endless IKEA. Doors allow people to leave IKEA are random and rare, causing several town-like communities to inhabit the IKEA. What makes this entry so good is the journals describing a hapless person who wandered into the IKEA. What we can learn from this entry is the idea of a dimensional refuge, a space between worlds that has become inhabited by lost people. This is similar to SCP-5005 Lamplight and the TV series From and Lost. In all of these examples, people end up in this space, cut off from other things around them. So, what we can take from these examples is the location defies normal understanding, but does still have rules. When designing such a place, ensure that your rules are in place before you start. That doesn't mean you can't tweak them as you go on, but it's important there is consistency with these rules for the players. Both the IKEA and From have dangers that only exist during the night, with the day relatively normal and safe, while the night is the fight for survival. While things need to have rules, they do not need to make sense. For example, in the Infinite IKEA, all the food restocks overnight, allowing people to survive. Where does it come from? No idea. It's not explained. While it doesn't make scientific sense, the internal consistency is maintained. The food is restocked each day. If the food is suddenly not restocked, that's confusing. It needs to have a reason. In From, every night is the same unless someone or something changes it. If you want to add the Infinite IKEA to your game, make sure you write down all the rules and understand how the location works. These can change with player actions, but make sure they're defined to start with. Inside the IKEA pocket, you have an adorable, tiny, zombie-like crocodile, SCP-682, the hard-to-destroy reptile. 682 was inspired by a photo of a rotting crocodile, with part of its skull showing and covered with mud and debris. The basic idea is that this large reptile is impossible to destroy. It regenerates all wounds and adapts to any environment it's placed in. It also hates all of humanity. There are many tales and stories about 682, with some suggesting it is the manifestation of hate, the steed of death, or just some ancient, unkillable reptile. Whatever the reason, one thing remains the same: it cannot be destroyed. Stories revolve around it being captured, contained, rather than killed. If you wanted to introduce this to your game, you would need to be careful in setting clear expectations with your players. Their job would be to capture the reptile, as killing it is impossible. This is a similar issue as introducing a slasher monster like Jason from the Friday the 13th franchise. How do you fight something immortal? What are the players going to do to capture this creature? If we use D&D as an example, all creatures in D&D follow the rules of the game. Even the term creature is defined. Everything in D&D is either a creature, object, or magical effect. If a spell can target anything, instead of saying creature or object, it will use the term target. That is a rigid rule of D&D, a truth that 682 would break. So if you want to make a creature that is like 682, but your players won't go insane trying to figure out how to deal with it, dial it back a little bit, but still give it a few get out of jail free cards. I would give it 2 traits that allow it to adapt. The first would be Magic Adapt. 682 adapts to an effect or spell currently affecting it or blocking its movement. For 24 hours, 682 is immune to the effect or spell. Spells that create magic walls, such as Wall of Force, do not stop 682's movement if it has adapted to them. 682 can be adapted to up to 10 such different effects, lasting 24 hours or until 682 chooses to end the adaptation. This would mean that your players have to continually change how they're trying to affect it. They can't simply cast Wall of Force and then move on, or, for example, banish it. The next is Physical Adapt. 682 adapts physically. It can adopt one trait, action, bonus action, or reaction belonging to another creature. 682 can have 4 such adaptations active at once, each lasting 3 days, or until 682 decides to end the adaptation early. If the adaptation has a limit, such as once a day, it instead becomes a Recharge 6 ability. This one allows 682 to adapt and change its physical form in order to better manage the challenges that are placed in front of it. This mimics much of 682's stories, where it grows new appendages, develops hard armor-like skin, or in one story, created hundreds of eyes all over its body. To use the second ability, I would have a list ready to go. Things like the giant constrictor snakes constrict. You might need to dial this back a little bit. For example, if you added the reactive from the Marolith, 682 can take 1 reaction on every turn in combat. You then add in the Yotchol's Toxic Escape, and every time 682 is hit with an attack, it can teleport and poison those around it. You could even throw in something like Greater Magic Resistance from the Rakshasa to pass every spell saving throw, and the Reflective Carapace from the Tarask. This will make it incredibly difficult to contain, but then I guess that's the point, right? To represent the creature being able to regenerate back from nothing, let's give it a trait that allows it to go into negative 100 hit points. At the start of each of its turns, it regenerates 50 hit points. If it has 1 or more hit points, it can act normally. This effectively allows it to be killed and temporarily stunned while it regenerates. Given the players about 2 turns, they might figure out that if they just keep hacking away at it, it is unable to regenerate back past 0 and stays inert. You may also want to put something in about it having reduced effectiveness at lower hit points. This would reflect the fact that when it's heavily damaged, it's unable to fight back as normal. The other thing you could do is make sure its adapt triggers at the start of its turn without any action required on its part. That way, it can still adapt to the attacks while it's regenerating. Maybe it can even adapt its own regeneration, giving it potentially 4 additional lots of 50 HP at the start of each of its turns. If the players focus on simply hitting it with as much damage as possible, eventually it's still going to get back up. However you do it, try and plan for those pesky player hijinks. Above the reptile is a small smiling badge. This is a stylized version of SCP-106, the Old Man. 106 shares the same unkillable characteristics of many SCPs. Unlike many others, however, it's slow, relying on ambush tactics to get the drop on its targets. It uses black, acidic goo as both a method to create portals and an offensive weapon. It can use this goo to make a portal to enter out of its own pocket dimension and form other portals within a limited range in order to move to. It can also drag people into these portals where it, well, takes its time. The goo is highly acidic and comes from the Old Man's body. He can, for example, wait inside a shuddery portal on a roof, open it, sending large amounts of acidic goo down on the person below. I would use the Old Man as an escape challenge, rather than having the players try to defeat him. Limit him to one building or structure, map it out, and where he might ambush them. The players then need to escape, with him attempting to intercept them as they do. Rather than treating 106 as a creature, I would think of it as a series of encounters. Map out your location, figure out where he will likely emerge, and plan out your encounters. When an encounter triggers, 106 has a damage threshold. Reach that and he retreats. At these locations, he springs the trap, tries to grab someone and drag them into a portal. You might then also have a random chance of him showing up if the group stays at a location. One of 106's limitations is it has trouble with irregular topography, so walls with lots of non-right angle corners, and he will have trouble teleporting into them. You also need the space big enough for him to emerge, so something like a sound room or an auditorium with lots of irregular walls, or a room with lots of shelves and cabinets, like a science room, are harder for him to emerge. On the shoulder is a sharp U-turn with SCP-999, the Tickle Monster. This delightful orange slime is an example of a friendly and caring SCP. To quote the article, subject's temperament is best described as playful and dog-like. When approached, SCP-999 will often react with overwhelming elation, slithering over the nearest person and leaping upon them or hugging them with a pair of pseudopods while nuzzling the person's face with a third pseudopod, all the while emitting high-pitched, gurgling and cooing noises. The surface of SCP-99 emits a pleasing odor that differs for whomever is interacting with. Recorded scents include chocolate, fresh laundry, bacon, roses, and Play-Doh. The Tickle Monster is the opposite of most of the horrors in the SCP world. While the other SCPs are trying to kill, destroy, and maim, the Tickle Monster is a beacon of innocence. To introduce the Tickle Monster is to introduce a creature of pure good. What exactly 999 is up to interpretation. Perhaps some sort of savior of humanity, but still a child. Perhaps just a creature of pure good. When bringing in such a creature, be careful it does not appear as a Deus Ex Machina, simply a device for you to do whatever you want. Limit it. For example, it can only stay in one location, or it gets tired and can only provide limited help. Don't make your players' actions irrelevant by having it come over the top all the time. A good way computer games often handle this is by having such creatures require help. Perhaps it's low on energy, trapped, or limited to certain areas. For 999, it's limited by its intelligence. While it is friendly and has a number of unique abilities, its intelligence is close to that of a dog rather than a human or even greater. Moving on to the very last SCP, SCP-096, Shy Guy. 096 is a tall, 2.38 meters, extremely thin and gaunt humanoid. It has pale skin and no hair on its body. It wears no clothes at all, and if left alone, it paces around its containment cell. 096 becomes activated when someone sees its face or a photo of its face. You'll start to sob and cry for a minute or two before moving at great speeds towards the person, regardless of their location and anything that might be between it and them. Once it reaches them, it then proceeds to destroy them in some fashion, but we don't know exactly what it does except that it leaves no traces of the person behind. So no problem, right? Just lock it up, make sure no one looks at it, and it's all good. Well, the photo hanging on the wall was taken during a mountaineering trip. 096 became activated when someone notices 2 pixels in the photo. These 2 pixels were of 906. It's activated, bursts out of its containment cell through solid steel, and heads across country towards the target. This led to many more people viewing its face, and many more casualties. The Foundation was forced to limit exposure, slowing down 096 and attempting to identify where it was going. We are told in great detail how many attempts to stop 096 failed. It took all manner of weaponry, anti-tank weapons, small arms fire, and none of which even slowed it down. While the flesh of 096 was damaged, its skeleton remained intact as it quickly regenerated its flesh. It was only after many deaths that the original target was destroyed by 096 and he became docile. The photo was recovered by chance during an investigation into trying to identify what triggered 096. 096 was captured and the exposure stopped when a bag was placed over its head. There is more to the story, of course, but my video is far too short to go into it in detail. So how would I put something like 096 into my game? Well, to be honest, I'm not sure I would. Player agency is important, and an unkillable creature that you can't look at in its face makes it hard to engage the players. Whereas 682, that a hard Destroy Reptile, people can actually escape from it. But the whole point of 096 is that you can't. I love 096, but for some stories they're left best just that. Stories, rather than being transferred to role-playing. The key skill for game masters is to come up with cool ideas and stories, but also to kill your darlings, to know when something is not going to work, and replace it with something that will. In this video, I spent a lot of time talking about individual SCPs. I ran through how I used the Living Gun, the Indoor Salesman, Lamplight, and Department of Abnormalities in my games. I also ran through 8 more classic SCPs. The Red Sea Object, MalO, the Plague Doctor, the Hard to Destroy Reptile, Infinite IKEA, the Old Man, the Tickle Monster, and Shy Guy, and how you might introduce something like these in your games, or, in the terms of Shy Guy, maybe you should skip that one. The links to all these are below in the doobly-doo. I've also linked to 3 wonderful channels that have, or are entirely SCP content. The Exploring Series, the Volgun, and Dr. Bob. As mentioned before, I consume a lot of SCP content, so imagine I'll be doing more videos where I delve into the classified files of SCP. For now, thank you for listening to this episode of GMspiration, and remember to have fun. Oh, and whatever you do, make sure you keep an eye on the redacted.